I'm Caitlin Huxley, and this is The Art of Campaigns, where I talk election strategy with industry experts. Today I'm talking with Michael Cohen, who is the author of Modern Political Campaigns and the founder of the Cohen Research Group. So this is actually the second edition. What prompted you to rewrite it?
Thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. I think the big reason to do it was twofold. Number one, we had just come out of COVID, and we were kind of grappling with the idea of what really has changed, which campaign tactics, which strategies sort of worked during COVID that we're going to keep and maybe work in a reopening world. And then on top of that, we had generative AI drop on us in the middle of the cycle. And it was the first time that new technology has come out that campaigners got at the same time all the way up and down the ballot. So usually what happens with a major jump forward in technology, particularly campaign technology, usually the top campaigns have enough money, have enough people, have enough expertise to actually use it and to experiment with it and to sort of get value out of it. But in this case, because it was so cheap, many people could use it for free, and if you're paying anything. And so there was this incredible experimentation going on that I thought was super interesting, and I wanted to understand it and make sure that, from someone who has, worked in this for 30 years, how I would use it and how other people would use it. And I thought that that was an interesting story.
Where do you come down? Is AI the next big thing? Can it manage your campaigns in 2026? What's the verdict?
So the verdict from my perspective is that the big campaigns got a little bit of utility with it. But the problem is that they already have experts. They already have people who could write. They already have vendors. They already have consultants. They already have really smart people on these campaigns. And so they were very reluctant to say, yeah, I'm going to turn over all of what I do for a living to the chatbot. I mean, even the pictures that were generated and all the other things that were generated, you'd end up with hands with 8 fingers, it'd be all kind of weird. And so to a real extent, I think a lot of the real pros, at the top level were like, okay, we don't need to do this. And we're looking for other ways to sort of use AI as a drafting tool more than using it for, voter facing content. And I think the further you went down the ballot, though, interestingly enough, the more utility there was for teams because they're generally underfunded. They don't have great people. It's well written to a certain extent. And then you can make it sing and then take that product to your campaign manager or your boss or to the candidate and have a much richer conversation about what we want to do. And so now what you have is a situation where these new campaigners are being leveled up very quickly. And so I think that that's really what we learned through these kinds of conversations that I had, as well as what the work that I did. AI over the next 2 or 3 cycles will be able to take more and more standard stuff from a campaign.
It's definitely found its place in my workflow, at least, right? I'm using it as a brainstorming tool. I do this exercise called the panel of experts. I ask, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Tell me the worst reason, from the point of view of, each of these people, why, this strategy that I'm thinking about won't work. And this, it'll come up with 5, different reasons from different points of view that are, some of them are dumb, but some of them, make me think, okay, so here's a hole in my plan, etc. I don't know where we're going from here, but I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
I think what you were just talking about is actually the best use case for it right now. It is really good for gut checks. It's really good for research, just basic research on a topic that maybe just comes up during a campaign and you have no idea, what this is about. You got to get smart real quick, right? And then it is, a good drafting tool. I think we should look at these things as tools, not as replacements for things. We should look at them as ways to amplify our knowledge and to give us a perspective that maybe we're missing. And I think that when we do that, I think it's actually really useful.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have forgotten that this is, like you said, a chat bot. So is that what has changed the most in the book? Is that's really what spawned the rewrite here?
Yeah, I mean, it's also these things are fairly cyclical. So like usually every 4 years, there is something that happens where we're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I would say that there's actually two things that really happened this time around. So like there was the question of, so what happened after COVID, which I thought was really interesting. And what we did was we integrated a lot of online tactics and married them with offline. And I feel like that was a really important piece. It was important in messaging. It was important in fundraising. It was important in organizing. And so it was all throughout the book. There's that thread. There was obviously the AI piece, but there was a big shift in earned media. It's shifted away from sort of mainstream media or even cable media and alternative media to almost like micro media. Like we ended up in a place where we things like podcasts, but we also ended up in a situation where with earned media, we end up in a place where we are essentially hyper targeting voters because they are consuming smaller and smaller media, but in a much more intense and active way.
Yeah, that algorithm is really getting good at telling what you want to see and putting it in front of you. And
Yes.
if you as a campaign are able to assess what it is that people are going to want to see, the algorithm is going to push it in front
It will
of,
help you.
your viewers. They won't necessarily be your voters, but they'll be your viewers for free. I mean, that's a wild
Yeah.
time in our history. In the last election cycle, it wasn't like this. And I don't know if it will be by the time the next one comes around.
Yeah, but I'm with you. I mean, when I look at this, I say, well, okay, last cycle, I would probably get recommended big programming, right? That may have hundreds of thousands of
Mhm.
viewers, maybe 3 or 4 days a week. Now it's okay, well, there's about half a dozen podcasts that have maybe tens of thousands of viewers or even thousands of viewers, but they're perfectly targeted for my interests. And so
Mhm.
I go, oh, wow, I could spend my time on this, which is much more interesting to me than stuff that, is kind of like within the realm of what I'm interested in, but not compelling, right? And so what it's also doing, though, is that it's lifting voices from people who you wouldn't have heard from, which is super interesting. So there's a lot more participation in the process. It's actually opening politics up, and it's
Mm.
bringing in people who feel like some of those larger programs don't speak to them or don't, resonate with them. And so what it's really doing is it's expanding, politics as opposed to contracting it. And I feel like it's also making it, and this is one of the main themes of the book last time and this time, because this is where I land, which is that this is all really good. Like what it's doing is it's giving voters more agency. It's like, okay, you're being asked in the right way for money, you're being asked in the right way to participate,
Mhm.
and you're also being asked to pay attention to things that are much more interesting and compelling and more in many ways more creative, right? These sort of long form conversations are the antithesis of how broadcast news was built. It's much more revealing, it's much more authentic, and I think that that's where voters are really want right now. And I feel like the earned media now is starting to catch up to where the other parts of campaigns were, which is how can I get down to the individual voter as much as I can?
So, in all of this, is there a favorite story or interview from the book that you added to this cycle that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I think there's one from this cycle. I'll leave that to the people who read it to decide. But my favorite story of all time is much more strategic. Okay, so the candidate that wanted to kill me, this is at the front end of my career when I was running campaigns in Florida. Her name was Nancy Argenziano, and she was called the Barracuda. Right, she was a pre-Trump Republican, and she would go to biker bars. She was very aggressive. She
So
would
Tea
be
Party-esque.
Tea Party-esque, yeah. I mean, Tea Party-esque, but also just the kind of like the vibe, right? And so she's running for state house, and she's one of three candidates that I'm given. The party did not like her for whatever reason. They thought she was going to lose, and when I first met her, I sort of introduced myself. I'm from the party. I'm here to help, and we started getting along really well. And I realized, my God, she's actually really good. When she would get into her room, people would really gravitate to her. They really appreciated how authentic she was and how real. She wasn't afraid to go anywhere. She was a fighter, and she was running against somebody called the Manatee Lady. And so I know
The
she
barracuda versus the manatee.
this is
Okay.
it, right? This is the ultimate
Because
battle,
that's
right? Between
Florida.
barracudas and manatees in Florida, right? In west coast of Florida. And so Helen Spivey was a well-liked incumbent who ran on and would always talk about the manatees and saving the manatees, which was a
Okay.
popular conservation issue in that part of Florida. Anyway, my candidate was big on water rights, and that was really a big deal. So anyway, this is all hyper-local stuff. The campaign goes on, and money started coming from. There's a big largesse from the National Party. They had raised a bunch of money, and so they dropped some money into the race, and they ran radio ads at that time
Hmm.
because that part of Florida high listening for radio is older people, and it was a song. They did a song, a spoof, on the Addams Family. I guess a couple days into it, Nancy calls me and she goes, "What the bleep is going on with your bleeping party? I'm gonna bleeping kill you if you don't get these ads off." And it's like, "Oh, hey, nice to hear from you, Nancy. What's going on? Like, why are you so angry?" First of all, these are really funny. I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
laughing like every 10 minutes with it on the
They're not
radio.
about her. What does she care?
No, I said it's a hit piece. And she goes, "I'm getting big blowback from people. They don't like negative ads. They're angry about this," and on and on and on. And I said, "Okay, Nance, let me call the party. Let me see what's going on." So
Mm-hmm.
I call Frank and I say, "Hey, Frank, I got an angry candidate. Can you give me something to work with here?" And he gets polling from the Terrence Group, which is a big GOP firm, excellent firm, and it basically says that the polls are actually starting to move in our direction. And we had about two
The
weeks
ad's
left.
working. It's moving
The
things.
ads
You're
working.
obviously
It's
not
moving.
cutting it now.
Right, but I then have to get on the phone with this woman who's threatened my life. So I call and I get the campaign manager on the phone, and I said, "Hey man, you gotta tell. I'm telling you, we just gotta hold on. If
Hmm.
she holds on, keeps running her race, the air cover's good, she's gonna win." And I said, "Hey, look, Nats, if we don't need to see each other until election day, I can do that. But we're not taking the ads down. They're gonna help."
Hmm.
I get off the phone. I actually don't see her until election day.
Hmm.
Anyway, election day comes. I get the final numbers for the biggest one that we were actually really concerned about. We win. And so it was the one race where you sit there and you go, wow, the data really mattered. I mean, it kept the candidate in it. It kept the things going the right way. The ad was good. When it came back and the polling was good, that helped me keep Nancy in the race, running what she was doing, but also making sure the ad didn't come down.
But I think the core of this really is a good lesson. In the last election cycle, we heard a lot about how polling isn't quite what it used to be. Maybe we need to rely less on polling. And I actually saw some post from some big industry guy who was talking about how what we really need is sentiment analysis now that we have these AIs. Yeah, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about here.
Yeah,
Now
yeah, I
that we have
got it.
these AI, we can have them, read all the social media. Anyway, the point of polling isn't to tell you if you're going to win. You'll find that out eventually. We don't need to know today. What we need to know is if the number has changed since we did our last round of messaging. Right? You do your polling, you put out your radio ad, you hope it's an earworm, and what really doesn't matter is what the doors are saying. What people are calling her up and complaining, "Oh, we hate this, we hate it, it's too negative." It's not her ad. Clearly, that's not what matters. What matters is that the numbers were moving and you could prove it with data. And I
Exactly.
think that
Yeah.
hasn't gone away.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that's really what it comes down to is that, you have to at some level understand that the difference between the data points
Yes.
is really the important thing here, not whether it's positive, negative, or neutral. I mean, with sentiment analysis, I mean, I was doing a lot of that stuff when I was over at
Yeah, it's definitely
George
not new.
Washington University. Yeah, I mean, we're talking like 7, 8 years ago when I was at George Washington University, we were using things like Crimson Hexagon. And, when you start looking at some of the posts that have been termed positive, negative, or neutral, some of them aren't. They don't get natural language, right? They don't get sarcasm, which frankly is a lot of what's online. And if you're using online as the database for it, as your inputs, you're going to get garbage output. And so even though there is a place for sentiment analysis to give you sort of context for maybe what you're seeing from a polling standpoint. And so what I advocate for is that You shouldn't just look at polling as the answer for everything. And I'm a pollster by training. I worked at Gallup, I've worked in political shops, and I have my own. But what I'm saying is like you take the change that you see in the data and then triangulate that with doors. You triangulate that with sentiment analysis. You triangulate that with all kinds of other dimensions. And frankly, that's where campaigns really need to level up. I don't think they need to find more data. I think they need to just be smarter about what they're looking at.
That's a good way to put it, I think. Although those lower level campaigns that we were talking about, leveraging, getting good leverage out of AI, they often don't have access to the same level of data that the big firms do. You have to pay.
Yeah, it's true.
There
You
is
have to pay.
a
Right, there's a paywall.
serious,
Yeah,
yeah.
there's a big paywall.
And so, I do these free reports for candidates. If you send me the voter file, I will make for you some charts to help you visualize, the numbers in your race. And a lot of these smaller candidates, these lower level candidates with these
Yeah,
lower budgets, they
yeah,
send me the county voter file. And there is just nothing on there except voter
I know.
history. And it's really hard, but if you can afford it, that it is accessible. So I guess back to the question here
Sure.
of AI and how that is changing things, especially with, the discussion on sentiment analysis. Is there something that you've seen a vendor do in the last election cycle that's just been spot on exactly what you think AI should be used for? Or maybe is there something that you've seen that's maybe a little ahead of its time and just isn't working quite yet?
Yeah, I mean, for example, like smaller campaign shops are actually using this as drafting tools for their proposals. So, for example, like a smaller firm that's trying to grow,
Hmm.
what they have been doing is putting together proposals based upon proposals that have actually been successful before. So, like back office, like business tools, like for firms to help them grow, I think is actually really, really smart. The other thing I would say too is that on qualitative research, one of the best research tools I've seen so far is the summarization of basically video content. And so if you have had, let's say, a bunch of different focus groups and you've got to give a report back to the client, you can give them a quick summary, right? So I think those kinds of efficiencies, back office, and also things that would go to a candidate or go to a team, within the team structure, not outward facing at voters, I think are really, really helpful right now. But we'll see. I mean, we could always be more surprised, and these things can take reasoning leaps, and then who the heck knows what's going to happen, right? And so I think to a real extent that's where we end up with this. And at least right now, like you said, where we can tell the difference between AI and not AI, the big leap will be when we can't. And that's a concern that I have moving forward. But from my perspective, when I was writing this book, my point of view is that everyone was covering disinformation really well. And I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to be like, so how is it being used? And what are the implications of that?
Well, so one of the implications, it sort of comes across another problem that we're having in the industry right now, which is a churn and burn of these small dollar
Yeah,
donors, right? Candidates, they are in campaigns that last 2 years, and they need as much money from you as they can get. There's no reason to take things easy, to build a real connection like you were talking about. And we're seeing drop off in donor retention, and we're seeing it in volunteer retention, in voter interest in voting. You have a whole section in the book on fundraising. What do you think is the answer to that small dollar churn and burn? Is there an answer?
well, first of all, it's real. So I think the first thing we need to say is that the churn and burn piece is real. And if you've looked at your phone over the past year and a half in the United States, you see, I mean, constant
Yeah, it's
appeals
bad.
for money, constant appeals for money, constant appeals for you to do something. And the fact of the matter is that people do want a break from politics from time to time. But I think here's the thing. No matter how many times you reach out to somebody, if you decide to keep going, you are risking a boomerang effect there. And so I think to a real extent, when we are running campaigns, we need to keep looking at the analytics here. This is where it could help us on open rates, on, on donating, on click-throughs and all of that. And as soon as you start seeing that curve go down, like that's where you need to cut it off. You need to figure out what's the optimal time to go and reach out to people. Not if I just keep asking them, they're going to say yes. If someone's not going to respond to you on the 5th text, they're not going to respond to you on the 6th one either. We just have to respond to that and be respectful of the voters that we're trying to include in our campaigns. If you want people to actually give you money and you want people to join your campaign, you have to respect their time.
One of the things on a previous episode somebody was talking about is, we often look at the different departments of the campaign, communications, digital, which I guess are more connected than they used to be, but field, coalitions, fundraising, all of these are separate. Even within outreach, where you look at the mail plan, you've got your digital plan, you've got your text plan, you've got your door plan. All of these things are separate. They maybe work off the same targeting universes, but for the most part, they're run separately. And something I've been trying to push, my candidates this last couple cycles here is to build, what I'm calling the contact stack. Instead of having like a volunteer funnel, instead of having a donor funnel, instead of a supporter funnel, it's just one massive funnel. What happens in what order? So if you've had sent a text and they responded, and you went to their door and you had a good connection with them, then you invite them to an event. If they respond via text, then that's a good way to do it. And it's all about making everything work together. You send a follow-up mail with talking about things that came out of COVID with a QR code to go to your website, or with an invite to an event upcoming in their neighborhood. It's all about moving them along on the path to having a real feeling connection with the candidate and the campaign. I think this just makes it more important that we talk to people about the things they want to talk about in the way they want to talk about them, with a person that they feel actually connected to.
Yeah, I agree. I think the way we've sort of professionalized campaigns over the last 30 years is we focused really on efficiency. What's the best use of that budget to reach people and do things, right? Instead of how can we make this more personal? And if we have the right data, you can reach out to people in a more personal way. That creates a virtuous cycle, right? Because then you get all the efficiencies out of that relationship. Like we're trying to create those kinds of relationships between people, which is someone mentioned something at the door that I'm really interested from, a campaign standpoint. Let's say it's in a specific issue. Well, why don't we have somebody from the campaign call them about the issue? Like, don't you think that after a conversation like that, they'd be much more interested in donating or organizing or helping for the campaign? Yes, they would, because you were there for them. You mentioned something in an offhanded comment to somebody at the door, and all of a sudden something's happening around it. Okay? Why are we doing more of those kinds of things? That's what really matters.
Because we didn't plan it ahead of time. Because nobody sat down and said, okay, after somebody gets ID'd at the door as a support, as this being their top issue, if it is one that our candidate supports, then someone calls them up. And it's been really hard to get that adopted over the last couple cycles.
The relational organizing, they're looking at this as a force multiplier. I mean, that's the way we should be looking at these things, not just in terms of efficiency, but in terms of creating the relationships that lead to efficiency. And we have the data. We just don't have the planning and the personal will and commitment to it. So, I mean, these are simple things if you think about them on human levels, but instead they're looking at this as, we don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of people, so how many more people could we do it with technology? And to me, that's a cop-out. That's not what politics is about. It's about helping people.
So, back to the book. What is the one thing, the biggest thing that you're hoping readers walk away with?
The main thing I hope that people take away from the book is that political campaigns are hard work. They are very complicated. I think people who are working on campaigns are doing the hardest work on the planet. I mean, it is so much more difficult than like things that I've worked on before,
Hmm.
and it's much more meaningful. I hope that people walk away with an appreciation for what goes into these things and how hard it is. Because I brought a lot of stories from the field in there about, what it takes. The other thing I would hope that people take from it is that some of those people who read it, who and understand now what this is all about, will choose to go into it. That they then see a place for themselves in one of the chapters of the book, whether it's field, whether it's fundraising, whether it's earned media or social media, whatever, and say, you know what, I can make a big contribution here. Like, I think I can do that.
This is actually one of the things that I really liked about your book when reading through it, is the fact that in every section you have a little write-up of what it takes to get involved. Here's an interview from somebody who's relevant. Here's what they say. Here's some tips on getting started and really kickstarting your career. I remember back when I was starting, I had no clue what I was doing. I thought I did. I did not. But so a book like this really would have been helpful.
Yeah, I think if you want to learn more about how political campaigns actually work right now and what it's like to work in the business, this is a book that you should probably take a look at. It's not written in a way that's like 5 levels above your head. And I think that it's a way to sort of change how you look at political campaigns, particularly for people who are super interested in politics right now, maybe for the first time.
Well, I got my copy and
Thank
I'm
you.
really enjoying it. Thank
Thank you. I
you.
appreciate it. I appreciate it. And, shout out to my team. This time around, they were really, really supportive. And I think the cover's terrific. Shout out to the graphics team. And really, it really matters when you write a book that you have a good team around you. And I think, from editing all the way to design and everything else and to leadership and promotion, they've really been a lot of fun to work with.
Awesome. Well, it's been great having you, great talking to you. I really appreciate you coming on. And I hope that my listeners or watchers on YouTube really learned something because I know I did.
Thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.